Hi guys, so you would think after the conclusion of my Amicus review series that I would take the opportunity to go and do something completely different for a while, but somebody pointed me in the direction of this movie, supposedly something just like the old school Amicus anthologies, and I felt compelled to check if that claim was true or not. Plus this film is free on YouTube, that there was that. But is it just like those old Amicus films? Well, it certainly looks the part on the surface. I mean, this came out in the same time period as those old classics like Asylum and From Beyond the Grave, etc., etc. Plus, it features a lot of the same personnel. So Freddie Francis directs this, and it also utilises the talents of some people who were in some of the Amicus films, people like Joan and Donald Pleasance. But as to whether it does actually feel like an Amicus anthology film, I would say it kind of does and it kind of doesn't. Sorry to completely fudge the answer, but the analogy I would use for this movie is that of a fake £20 note, albeit a really good one. So it looks the part, it smells the part. If you hold it up and wave it around, it will react just the right way in the wind. You could probably fool a shopkeeper with it. Hey, do you want to buy my Amicus film, The Tales That Witness Madness? Why, yes, because I can see that definitely looks like an Amicus film. I'll take it off you. Thank you very much. But just like an actual fake £20 note, a very good one, if you hold it up to the light and just kind of check out the various angles, eventually the level of authenticity may just begin to drop eventually. And what that means for this movie is that the level of quality control in some of the main stories is just not quite there. There's a certain level of sheen to the old Amicus films that I would expect to find even in the poorer efforts like Torture Garden, but in this film it's a little bit dicey at times, especially when it comes to the endings of some of these stories. I really didn't like a lot of the final twists and how some of the stories ended, but we'll come to that because I'm going to go through each of the stories individually. Although first we will start with the connecting story, which just so happens to feature the aforementioned Mr. Pleasance playing a scientist. Sounds good so far, doesn't it? That feeling won't last. This is an audacious attempt at sort of copying the wraparound story from Asylum, but to nowhere near as good effect. So Pleasance is playing a scientist without scruples. He's working in some kind of underground research bunker. He's got all these different people locked up in various rooms, and these are essentially the characters from the four main stories we're about to watch. Now, a money man turns up and Pleasance takes him around the four rooms, and that's when we get to see the main stories one by one. But to be honest, I didn't pay that much attention to the clips between the stories in this movie because there's not a lot going on in them, at least until the very end of the movie when it all gets a bit bizarre. So Pleasance is suddenly carted off to the funny farm because he's seeing things that the money man isn't. And then the invisible tiger turns up, which is a monster from the first story that we're about to talk about in a minute. But it all feels like just random things being thrown at us, the audience, in the hope that we'll accept this as some kind of big, grand finale. The best thing I can say about it all is that it's at least a better wraparound story than what you get with the basement scenes in Vault of Horror. But that's literally as polite as I can be, so let's just move on. Mr. Tiger is the worst of the main stories for me, but at least we're getting the biggest dud out of the way first. So what we've got here is a kid who has an imaginary friend, except it's a tiger, and it's actually real. So therefore it's not imaginary, it's just an invisible tiger that somehow lets itself in and out of a 2 up and 2 down without knocking anything over or hurting anybody, until the end of the story when it suddenly breaks cover and finally decides to throw its weight around a little bit. Now, while the kid is fostering this unusual friendship, his parents are constantly bickering and arguing, and that's my first problem with this tale. I just hated these two characters. I hated their persistent arguing. The father figure, the guy playing him, is just a bad actor, period, but let's not dwell on that. Now, at the end of the story, the tiger attacks the parents, as I've already hinted, and then that's it. And it's kind of like, oh, we just went through all that just to have that? There's no, like, extra twist or anything? That this is all you're going for? I think what we're meant to think throughout the story is that the tiger is imaginary, therefore making the final scene a big surprise. But I absolutely felt that the tiger was real throughout the story, so the final scene was not a surprise to me. I mean, this is a horror film, so naturally we are going to think that the tiger is real, right? Otherwise, what's the point of having the story? And I think a lot of seasoned horror fanatics will take that position while they're watching this. So the ending just falls flat. The story really doesn't work at all. The best part of Mr. Tiger is the bit where it shows up in the underground research centre. Oh wait, that's not actually a part of the story. And in the blink of an eye, we come to the very best story in the film, and I say that with a heavy heart because the one after this has got Joan Collins in it, but for me, this one is the best. It's the only one in this film that scared me on any level. So what we have here is a portrait of a middle-aged man, but the picture can change the direction the eyeballs are looking in, and it does that regularly throughout this. Now, this isn't the first time I've seen this concept in horror, but it never fails with me. It's just a very creepy idea. These particular eyeballs, they can magnetically pull people towards the picture and force them to sit in the seat of the penny farthing bike that's positioned directly below the picture. Now, if the story didn't go any further than this, I still think it would have worked. It would have been a bit like a Freddy Krueger skit long before Nightmare on Elm Street. You could have had the victim riding the bike faster and faster until their muscles blow up or something. But this story is even more ambitious than that. So if you ride the penny farthing bike, you get transported to this Mary Poppins type world where people are just sat around by this lake and this bridge, and there's a weird burned looking guy peeking out from behind a gravestone nearby. To be honest, I forget the details of what the time travel is about in this story, but I still really enjoyed it anyway. It's very random, but it has the desired effect somehow. I mean, it's still a case of throwing a load of stuff at the wall and hoping it sticks, but on this occasion it works. This story made me think actually that it would be a really good creative writing exercise to just take three really random concepts that have nothing to do with each other and then try and make a story out of it. So in this instance, you've got the portrait, the penny farthing, and a 19th century countryside. Probably this story wasn't created that way, but the more I think about it, I would actually like to do that exercise myself. I'm just wondering what my three particular objects would be. My first would be an envelope without the letter in it. Picture the scene. You're married to Joan Collins. Peak era Joan Collins at that, and the two of you live in a really fancy open space Art Deco woodland cabin that looks like it cost a pretty penny or two, and seemingly you don't have to work for a living, you've got enough money. What would you do with that? I'll tell you what I wouldn't do with that. I wouldn't go into the woods and pick up some dirty looking broken tree stump thing, bring it into the house, plonk it down in the living room, and then spend most of the next week looking at the thing and decorating it and stuff, whilst all the time Joan Collins is stood 10 feet behind me, relentlessly begging me to go upstairs with her, and all the time I'm just constantly shutting her down. But leaving aside the weird and unexplainable mental condition that the male character is suffering from in this story, this does have a really good setup. As soon as the tree thing is established in the living room, I was wondering what it was going to do next. I thought it might be a bit like the clown from Hell House. I thought the characters might suddenly come out of the bathroom and, oh, there's the tree thing, just stood at the top of the stairs but not moving. I thought it was going to be like a musical statues sort of deal, but the horror version, you know. But sadly, the tree thing never leaves its spot in the living room, and there's a really obvious twist at the end of this story. So this is twice now in this movie we've had a really bad twist to finish off a story. That there's such a shoddy attempt at misdirect going on here. I don't understand how anybody can be fooled with what the story tries to throw at you at the very end. It's just silly, if you ask me. I mean, with Mr. Tiger, I didn't care anyway. It's not a very good story, but this has a good setup, and I really wanted to see it fulfill its potential, and it just doesn't do that. It's a shame. You could say that this story branches off in a really unsatisfying direction. I'm sorry, I'll make like a tree and leave. Ooh. Our final story is something of a punctured balloon, sadly. I can't even pronounce the title of it. So we've got this middle-aged woman, well, early 40s, late 30s possibly. A Lothario has come into her life who she really likes, but he's more interested in her teenage daughter, and the teenage daughter quite likes him back. There was the potential here for a good bit of love triangle horror, a bit of murderous revenge going on, possibly, you know, crimes of passion, that kind of thing. I think if the story had done that, I would have liked it as a tragic but very believable drama, albeit not a very original one. But unfortunately, the story moves into areas of the supernatural and the occult, and it's so predictable what's going to happen. Like, this guy, he's not actually interested in the teenage daughter. He just needs a virgin for some kind of ritual, but it's so obvious to us, the audience, what's going on. I'm not normally very good at guessing movies, and yet this entire film, I'm talking about all the stories now, it just made me feel like Mystic Meg. I just somehow knew everything before it happened, especially in this final story. Nothing came as a surprise to me, absolutely nothing. I'd say the only story that doesn't suffer from either a bad twist or just complete predictability is the one with the portrait and the penny farthing, but all the others do suffer from those problems. So, you know, to only have one story that works out of 4 is not a great success rate. So I don't own a copy of this to show you. I watched it for free on YouTube, so you know what? Check it out. It won't cost you anything, and who knows, you might enjoy these stories more than I did. But in terms of my final word on how I would compare this movie to the Amicus anthologies, I would say that it's just slightly worse than the very worst of the Amicus films, which for me would be Torture Garden, but it's entirely subjective. But look, I own all 7 Amicus anthology films, and I do tend to rewatch them every sort of 5 to 10 years or so. I'm just guessing on the time length. I don't think I would have bought this on Blu-ray even if it hadn't been free on YouTube. That's my instinct anyway. I just don't think it's quite up to the required standard of what makes a really good anthology film, but it was still interesting to check out, and like I said, it might be an entirely different experience for other people. But for now, let's get to the bag of terror and find out how that translates into a score. So we've got 1, 2, 2.5 bloody axes out of 5. Now, there's no reading update today. It has been a while, actually, since I did a reading update, and that's because I am working my way through Cujo by Stephen King, and it's slow going because I'm not massively enjoying it. But I'll say more about that when I do finally get to the end of that book. But for now, I will bid you adieu, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.